So, I'd like to ask those of you who have a cell phone to please take them out of your pockets or your backpacks and hold them in your hand. Look at it closely. Gaze at the sleek surface, the meticulously crafted lines. You might want to stroke the cool exterior. You might want to feel the weight of the power of interconnectivity. 22 years ago, my older son, Chi, came into the world, was brought into the world by 9 remarkable women. I had 3 midwives at my birth, 2 birth coaches, my chiropractor, a photographer, a videographer, and a friend who just heard that all hands were needed. I called my mom on a rotary phone, and she came the next day to care for me, fed me Chinese herbed medicinal chicken soup. It was 1992, and the year after that was the installation of the first digital cellular network. My second son was born in 2000, a mere 8 years after my first one. And in that year, by then, cell phone use was so widespread that it produced the first cell phone brandishing Barbie doll. So we love our electronic toys, our digital devices. We're enchanted with them. What I want to do today as a knitter, story crafter, artist, I am approaching the Anthropocene as a creative story maker, as someone who really believes in the power of story, the power of the arts, the power of sensory perception to connect us with abstract ideas. So I'm very interested, also as an educator, to make abstract concepts of climate change, the Anthropocene, to make them real and to bring them into our embodied understanding. So I would like to link these stories of my family, of my boys, with systems of communications, the communications network, the media systems, and kind of give them a twist and look at all of this in the context of planetary systems or the Anthropocene. Our love of our electronic toys is widespread. It really, from activists to media industry CEOs, to artists and the entertainment industry, all across the spectrum of our society, there's great desire for electronics. But what's behind the magic screen? What's behind the screen that enchants us? And who was harmed in the making of these wonderful toys that we so love? That's a question that the media industry has not asked, and it's a question that media studies in universities and colleges have not until very recently asked in a serious way. It's a question that many of us have not asked. Richard Maxwell and Toby Miller asked that question, who was harmed, in their book, Greening the Media. So, with your phone in front of you, I would like to consider with you what's behind the screen. Well, vanadium is a metal that is in your cell phone. It's a metal that allows your battery to more efficiently store energy. It's a mineral that keeps steel from cracking at extreme temperatures. So it's actually really widespread in our society. We're really dependent on vanadium in profound ways. Vanadium is also mined in South Africa. And there, the mining of the mineral makes the workers sweat black powder. It makes people urinate blood. It has caused the deaths of hundreds of South Africans and destroyed many ecosystems. Some more metals: tantalum, tungsten, tin, and gold. Tungsten allows your phone to vibrate. Tantalum is necessary for your battery to hold a charge. Tin is used in soldering, and gold coats the wiring in your phone. All of these metals have been named conflict metals for the armed conflict and sexual violence and corruption in the government and other atrocities that are driven by trade in these minerals. To get a bigger picture of the scale of the materiality of our phones, our mobile devices, let's look at the Pew Research Center's Internet and American Life project, which last year reported that 91% of all people in the United States own a cell phone. 1/3 of the world's population uses the internet. And as of last year, the number of cell phones in the world exceeded the human population. So Maxwell and Miller, in their study, ask us to experience and understand the interconnections between the material conditions of the production of media and communications industry and social systems, human systems. In 1998, the number of computers that were cycled into obsolescence was 20 million. By 2005, the rate had soared to 130,000 a day. So this is the result of the cycle of obsolescence and our drive for perpetual innovation. So, by next year, our phones that you're holding will be obsolete. They'll be the old toy. And 130,000 computers a day will be sent to the e-waste piles. So just imagine for a minute the vastness of these electronic waste dumps, many of them in China and India, where children and workers are exposed to the toxins, contracting asthma and bronchitis. In India, many of them lose the capacity to work by the time they're 35. So this stuff is overwhelming, these statistics. The other effects of climate change that you've listened to other speakers talk about today. So how do I respond to this? Well, I've been hosting story circles in my neighborhoods, in my community organizations, at the schools where I teach. I host circles to invite people to tell stories from their own lives, of their own lives. And what I've found is that when you listen to people tell their own stories, they are full of love and longing, grief and joy, contradiction. They're stories of all kinds of shapes and textures. They deviate from this kind of shape, which I think many of you will probably recognize. How many recognize this? It's the classic narrative arc, as it's called, although these are, triangular, but that idea of, rising action, reaching a climax, and then falling. Otherwise known as the master narrative. So some key components of the master narrative is this idea of individualism. The hero's journey is an archetypal story. Many of the stories that we see in the films in Hollywood, many of the stories we read about in novels are focused on one individual story. One classic nature writing piece is Thoreau's Walden. And Walden is also a story of individuality, self-reliance, right? It's a story of someone who chose to isolate himself from a society that he felt was suffering from the same problems that we're still suffering from, where people were no longer able to grow their own food, where people felt dependent on other systems. So another feature is linear time. The idea that time moves just forwards and backwards. So when you hear people say things like, well, we can't go back to the Stone Age, that's being kind of trapped in this sense of linear time. Dualism and binary ways of thinking is another feature of the master narrative. So with dualism, oppositional forces are distinct from each other and constructed as a hierarchy. Good and evil, man, woman, human nature. So those that binary construction is used to justify oppression. So how can we learn a different kind of storytelling or different models for storytelling? Well, as an interdisciplinary artist and thinker, I've been really trying to learn from other disciplines outside the arts, trying to learn from ecologists, systems thinkers, climate change scientists. And one of the things that I've learned about is this. It's the panarchy diagram, panarchy model, which was developed by C.S. Holling as an antithesis to hierarchy. The panarchy diagram describes complex adaptive systems and how they cycle through phases of growth and exploitation, where they're using more energy than producing, conservation, and then release. The system gets to a point where it's too complex and interdependent. And so a disruption might cause a collapse or a release of the system, and then that pushes the system into a stage of reorganization. So that pattern of growth and destruction and regeneration is actually a pattern that is also seen in many stories across human history and across many different cultures. Homer Dixon uses the panarchy model to understand the fall of the Roman Empire. So in imperial Rome, as the system of Roman systems expanded, they developed a colonial system, a system of conquest, where they were relying on energy subsidies from distant lands that they had conquered. And Homer Dixon points out that another feature that's important in the panarchy theory is this idea of nested systems. So there are larger systems, larger, slower moving systems within which are nested smaller, faster moving, more adaptive systems. So the larger the system, the more difficult it is to change it, the more energy it takes to change the system. So in the case of imperial Rome, the agricultural systems, the transportation systems, governance, educational systems, religious systems were nested together and interlocked. And at a certain point, interdependency like that makes the system as a whole more vulnerable to collapse and to disruption. So when a system that is interlocked like that is disrupted at that point of between conservation and release, if there aren't other systems, other nested systems that are in different stages, then the whole thing falls apart. So that's what happened to Rome. So I want to tell a little story about Wangari Maathai. This is a contemporary example of someone who really brilliantly navigated systems at various levels. Wangari Maathai was an environmental and political activist, and she saw that her country of Kenya was being destroyed by its acceptance of a colonial, modern agricultural system. So the land in Kenya was being used to grow not food for Kenyans, but monocropped, for export. And so the topsoil was being destroyed. So Wangari Maathai reframed the issue of topsoil loss as one of territory loss. And this is a narrative move that the eco-critic Rob Nixon talked about as reframing the discourse on national security. In his book, Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor, he shows how Maathai was able to use this reframing of the story to organize many women, small circles of women, small communities of women, to plant millions of trees and created a green belt in Kenya. And she was able to restore their homeland. So that vision of smaller communities, smaller, more resilient systems is very inspiring to me, and I'm thinking about how to reclaim that vision in these story circles. And I want to leave you with the story circle model, which is a very simple framework for inviting people to share the stories of change that they're experiencing. I boiled down the guidelines to 3 simple ideas. We sit in a circle, everybody gets equal time, and we listen with open ears, mind, and heart. And in these story circles, listening to each other's stories, we form community, and we begin to understand ourselves not as isolated individuals, but as part of a collective. So I leave you with this image, which is just me continuing to try to adapt the panarchy idea. And thinking about how these story circles might link up with all the wonderful small alternative systems that are flowering. Local economies, local food systems, alternative economies, community economies. I think it's, in these kinds of story circles and small community settings, we can collectively envision multiple solutions for addressing the Anthropocene and all the overwhelming problems with which we're faced. So I hope that you leave this day inspired to host your own circle of change. Thank you.